Tonight's speaker is Gail Brodholt, RE. Gail is a leading Linocut printmaker and painter, and she creates very vibrant and colourful work, which I'm sure you've all seen around London and elsewhere. She deals mainly with the contemporary urban landscape, and a lot of her work concerns London and its journeys around train stations and underground stations, and how those journeys often form a backdrop to our lives. She's a fellow of the Royal Society of Painter Printmakers, and she currently holds the post of honorary curator. Gail has won numerous awards for her work, and she's represented by many galleries. I should say there's going to be an exhibition of Gail's black and white work at the Eames Gallery starting from the 1st of September this year. So if any of you'd like to go along to that, it'll be on for about 6 weeks. So tonight, Gail will be showing us a video of her work, of the process of making her most recent lino print of Borough Market, and she'll be taking us through that. Once the video comes to an end, Gail will be presenting us a slideshow showing the inspiration for her work and other people's work that informs her own work. And then after that, we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers. And we'll have the opportunity for you to either ask Gail questions directly, or if you're not happy to do that, do feel free to type them into the comments box at the bottom of the screen and I can ask the questions for you. So that will be great. So if we'd like to start the video, everybody can enjoy that and then we'll move on to the slideshow. Thank you.
Last summer I made a lino cut of Borough Market. It was in the middle of lockdown and was a very quiet and different place to how it normally is. In the studio I cut the block. I normally use 4 blocks. And I start off, as here, with a darkish colour. This is a very rich dark brown. I have an old Albion press made in 1841. I've had it for many years and I bought it on eBay. And here's the first colour printed, with lots of white, which all gets covered up in the end. And then we have the second block. I'm using a very thin, transparent cream, as I like the first colour to show through. You get some fantastic neutrals that way. For the third block, I used, again, another transparent glaze, this one an orange. I was hoping to get a feeling of the light pouring in through the roof and through the entrances to the market. Back to the press for the third time. And that's the third colour printed. Lots of neutrals. And the final block, I'm using Viridian. unusual choice for me, but the Borough Market is painted in this very unusual green. And there we are, using the press for the final time. And there's the last colour. And there you can see all the stages of the printing process.
That was marvellous. Thank you very much, Gail, for that, preparing that for us. Would you like to start your slideshow now, or are you?
Yes.
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 With that. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much to everyone who's tuned in, and of course thank you to Kate and Teresa for organising this. I'm a Londoner and I grew up in South London. My father was Norwegian and my mother was from Trinidad. They met while my father was in the Merchant Navy, and they lived for a while in Norway, but it was far too cold for my poor old mum, so we ended up in London. And so, you know, as a compromise, not too cold. I took a degree in fine art painting at Kingston University. We spent the first year doing a term of each thing. So the first term would be painting, the second term printmaking, the third term would be sculpture and possibly ceramics. In the print room, I mean, it was actually quite overwhelming. We did every single process. So it was like a week on lithography, a week on etching, and it was straight. And to be honest, I was quite glad at the end to get back to the piece of the painting studio, but we did have a good grounding. Then I carried on painting when I left, did a bit of printmaking, but when my children were finally off at school, I went back, took some evening classes, and I've never looked back. This is the outside of my studio. I work in a big complex in Woolwich in southeast London, right by the Thames barrier. It's a series of Victorian converted warehouses, but there's also a lot of industrial stuff still there. And there's a lovely view of the Thames, which is great for thinking time. It's a hulking, great rotting boat, and across the way is the Tate and Lyle sugar refinery, but it's makes a nice change from being stuck in the studio. And this is the studio. I share it with another printmaker, Louise Davis. We've shared for a long, long time now. She's an etcher, and that works quite nicely for us both because we obviously have completely different practices. And it's nice to share. It's nice to share a studio because obviously, as we all know, printmaking can be quite a lonely business. And that's a view from the other end. So we have half each. Almost all of my work is centred on London. I obviously, as I say, I grew up here and it's what I know best. It's very important to me, you know, to know a place very well if I'm going to do any work, but that's just me. This is Ye Old Cheshire Cheese, a lovely pub just off Fleet Street. And I went up there during lockdown. Of course, it wasn't open, so I had to sort of make up all the lit windows, sadly, as I sort of rather missed going to the pub, but, you know, hopefully that's all behind us now. London is a really big city, as we know. It's very sprawling. It has huge transport links, and one of these, of course, is the canals. And I love the shape of the sweep and the shape of the canals. This is Regent's Canal, right by Bethnal Green gas holders. I like roads. I do think that they give a very nice sort of way into the print. You know, you get that great sweep and it adds perspective. This is the M11 coming back from Norfolk, where we spend a lot of time. And if you have a look in the distance, you can see Canary Wharf. And it's at this point that I think, oh, nearly home. And that's another print here of another road. This is quite different. I was asked a couple of years ago to be Printmaker of the Year up at Printfest, which is a printmaking festival up in Cumbria. And part of the experience you were commissioned to do a print of the local area. So this is a view. This is the road from the bottom of Lake Windermere along to Keswick, and completely different landscape to what I'm used to. If I'm out in the country, I'm normally in the home county. So this is quite different, quite spectacular. Right, and this is another print of a road, and this is the Westway coming over Hammersmith Basin, going right over the canal. I love the shape of it. I know a lot of people think it's a terrible blot on the landscape, and I suppose it is, but it's also somehow it's really quite magnificent. Yeah. So another commission I did was for London Transport. I did this about a year and a half ago. They wanted 2 posters for their marketing campaign called Hidden London. They've got an awful lot of empty and disused abandoned stations, and they do tours. So they were trying to encourage people to buy tickets to go, and it was a great way of fundraising for London Transport Museum. So the one on the left is Highgate High Level, and the one on the right is the Strand. I had them up just before lockdown. They went up, so I had a couple of months with them on the tube, which was fantastic, lucky timing for me. And again, because of what happened with lockdown, they are mostly still up. They normally only go up for a couple of months, so I was quite lucky there, but not so lucky otherwise, because I was due to do another couple, but that's all been put on the back burner now, obviously, so fingers crossed. A lot of my inspiration comes from train journeys in particular. I just love sitting on the train. You can't do anything when you're on a journey like the train. You can probably look on your phone and stuff like that. Most people do, but I just love looking out the window because you get these little viewpoints which you don't see at all. This is looking down onto Great Southwark Street, which is underneath all the railway lines in Southwark, and it's a completely different atmosphere down there. And if you're on the train, you just catch a glimpse of it as you're whizzing by, and it's fantastic to see these little vignettes. And that's another one. This is on the approach to Blackfriars. You look left, and just a little gap in all the blocks of flats and offices, and you can see along to Waterloo East Station and the London Eye beyond. I love using colour and layering colour. It gives you so many tones and quite a lot of texture as well. This is a black and white print. I have recently been going back to doing more black and white. I think it's just really interesting. You only have black ink. It's the only thing you can use. With a colour lino cut, you layer the colours, you can create atmosphere, weather conditions because of the colour, but with black and white, what you see is what you get. There's no hiding. So I think the design and the structure needs to be absolutely perfect. I've actually got a show, as Kate said, at Eames Fine Art starting on September the 1st, which is comparing my black and white lino cuts with the colour ones, and it's called Back to Black. This is the print that I did of Borough Market, which you saw in the film. I put this one in, I suppose, because I do like to put people in. I do quite often have a lot of people in my prints, but of course, in the last year and a half, there hasn't been anybody around. So the normally bustling marketplace of Borough Market, it was completely deserted, and just the odd person using it as a shortcut. Another aspect of my work, I suppose I like to find odd, unconsidered places where people just drive past. I mean, petrol stations. I was driving home from the studio one night and it was very dark and drizzly. And I had the chicken shop on one side and the cemetery on the other. And I was waiting at the traffic lights. And in the distance, I could see this really warm, comforting glow. And it was the petrol station on the corner. And I don't know, I thought, I could make a Linocut. So there it is. And train, oh yes, no, this is Factory Junction. It's the view from the footbridge at Wandsworth Road train station, and you had a lovely view of Battersea Power Station. But it's an illustration of how fast London changes, in that between one little sketching trip and another, they took down that massive gas holder. And now, of course, you can't see Battersea Power Station from this angle because they've put hundreds of big blocks of flats around it, just what we all need, obviously. And the only way you can see Battersea Power Station properly is from the river. And this is London Bridge Station. That's another one. Train stations also change a lot. And back in the day, you could walk up the steps and change platforms by going over footbridges over the platforms. And so you got this fantastic panorama. But of course, you know, progress, they wanted to redevelop London Bridge. So they took down that Victorian canopy because it wasn't listed, unfortunately, and they put a new sort of more modern thing up. They took the walkways down, so if you want to switch platforms, you have to go underground and across and back up again. And to be honest, it is a much more pleasant way of traveling because it's clean, it's efficient, it's spacious, but you know, you lose such a lot of the character, and I can't help feeling sad sometimes about that. So this is me printing, as you see, the one I was talking about earlier. It's called Some High Lonely Tower. It's a very big print, but I wanted to end with my favourite printmaking quote. It's from George Bodmer. He's an American academic. I think he teaches literature, but he's also a printmaker. And he said, printmaking is fun because it takes a perfectly simple process like drawing and makes it as complicated and error-prone as possible. And I think that really does sum up printmaking for all of us. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Gail. That's brilliant. That's a fantastic quote, and I'm sure one we can all totally empathise with. I also particularly loved your image of the M11 because I also go up to Norfolk a lot. That is my first view of London, and I always think, well, I'm back in London now, so that's
you only see it for a second and then it's disappeared again, but
exactly, yeah, you just have to be on the brow of that hill, don't you? So yeah, it's fantastic. And I love the way that you're capturing a London that is fast disappearing, and I hadn't really thought about that, but now you've brought it to our attention. That's so true, because things change so fast, particularly that area around Battersea Power Station and Vauxhall and Nine Elms and everything. So yeah, it's fascinating, and the whole London Bridge thing. I'd forgotten how much it's changed, to be honest.
You get so used to it so quickly, don't you?
I just know I can never find my way to the right platform, but
I've been using it for ages, and although it is much cleaner and efficient, I still never sure exactly where I am when I come down those huge escalators.
No, you can't quite picture yourself in relation to the rest of London, can you? Exactly. So thank you so much. So I thought the video was fantastic, and seeing how you create your prints. and now seeing where your inspiration comes from and how you've created all those beautiful prints. So now we're going to open the floor for questions. As I said, if you don't want to ask a question directly and you want me to ask it, there's a chat button at the bottom of your screen. If you want to chat anything in there, I'm happy to ask questions for you. Otherwise, if you just raise your hand, and I think Teresa will unmuted us. So Helen Benson looks like she has a question.
Mute. I've unmuted. Is that right?
We can hear you now. So yeah.
Okay. I'm just wondering, all these glimpses, do you just remember them in your head, or do you take a photo, or is somebody with you who takes a quick photo, or what? You know, all those little glimpses you go past so quickly, say in a car or something, or on the train.
Well, the thing is that they're mostly glimpses that I see a lot. You know, I see them quickly and I think, oh, that's interesting. And then every time I go up on the train or in the car, I have another look and another look. And if I'm in the car, or actually in the train as well, I take my little sketchbook and I'll just look at it. You get a second to do it, and then I'll put down what I think I see. And these are the bases for the prints. But of course, when I've actually decided, yes, this is a print I want to make, I will take photos. But I mean, you know, they're blurry and they're through the train window or the car window. You know, they just give you a bit more. But it's sketches really, because that's the essence of what you're looking at. And then I sort of make it up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
I think, Hilary, did you want to ask a question?
I'm actually just typing it out.
Oh, okay, fine.
Okay.
I'll wait for that then. Does anyone else have a question? Kit has a question. I can't hear Kit though. Do you need to unmute yourself, Kit?
There you go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Hello, Gail. Hi. Thank you for that. I was just wondering, I'm really fascinated by your colour choices and how you print the dark first. I just wonder if it takes a lot of trial to where you get to in the end, you know, because they do have that kind of lovely glow. And I'm kind of quite curious as how you choose the colours. Is it a lot of experimentation?
Yes. Yes, it mostly is because you're using so many layers, you just can't tell what it's going to be like at the end. So I mean, I'll have a rough idea. It's nearly always a darkish colour, but I sometimes use a turquoise or a cobalt, but it's always quite dark. And then it all just depends, because you can use, say, a very pale, thin grey next, or you can use a pale sort of cream, and it all just changes. So I do a lot of proofing, sometimes, you know, 20 or more really, because it's impossible to tell how it's going to look. And then you might put a very thin crimson on the end of the last one, and just by putting a tiny bit of scarlet in, it just changes the whole thing. It's astonishing how the balance is just so finely tuned. So yeah, a lot of proofing.
Thank you.
So Hilary's question for you, Gail, is she says, could you speak a bit about the process of preparing your linos? Do you trace your image onto the lino block, or do you use different transparent colours? What do you mean by different transparent colours, Hilary?
Well, what I meant is there was 4 linos, and I was just wondering how different they are from each other, you know, and how much you cut out of one and how much you cut out the other, and then just getting the colours by using transparent overlays, so you've got the colours coming from underneath from the same piece of lino.
Yeah. So what I do, just to quickly go through, is that I do lots and lots of sketches, and then I do a working drawing, which is basically absolutely everything on it, and then I trace that onto nearly always 4 blocks, and then go over it with a Sharpie or something, and then I cut the first block. I don't cut very much, print it, cut the second block, cut what I think, but I have to inch along with it, because if you know, with lino, if you cut it, it's gone. So I just do a really basic cut on each of the blocks, but only as printing in between. I don't just cut all the blocks and then print them. I mean, I think people could do that if they're good at computers. You could get it all layered before you cut, but I think that probably takes quite a lot of spontaneity out and the lucky accidents. So I do it in the old analog way of just inching along, and then I go right back to the beginning and I cut a bit more, and then keep proceeding along slowly.
So basically, is it about 8 layers of colour, or could it be 10, or?
No, it's only every 4.
Okay.
4 colours. I find that the more colours you put on with Linocuts especially, the ink just builds up. You get little tiny peaks, and it actually becomes difficult to print and cover the colour. So I tend to stop at 4.
Thank you.
Interesting. Jack is asking a question. She says, I noticed that you use Japanese tools as well as Swiss cutting tools. Are the Japanese ones easier for fine lines?
Do you know what? I think they probably are. I mean, I have got file ones as well, fine ones, but I think the Japanese ones for the very, very fine lines, I think, you know, they're somehow better, but I don't know why I use both. I have no idea. I just always have. And I don't think there's a lot of difference between them. I think it just sort of depends on what I've got in my hand at once.
Yeah, I was going to ask what kind of ink you use. Do you have a preference for a particular type of ink, or, you know, from a particular manufacturer, or do you use lots of different inks? Or
no, I'm actually not very experimental. I just use oil-based linseed oil-based inks, and I get them really from hand pressed Cranfield. But but Lances as well. Sometimes, you know, depending on who's got what in stock, because they're actually the same. The Lances inks are made by Cranfield, although they probably don't like you to say that. But
oh, are they? Okay. And I presume you use quite a lot of extender as well.
Yes, I do. I use a lot of extender. I also ink up very thin when I can.
Yeah.
And I also blot with newsprint.
You blot the actual liner once you've inked it?
I blot the print once I've printed.
Oh, you blot the print. Okay, that's interesting. And what's the purpose of that for your work, would you say?
Well, the thing is with layers, especially with very thin ink, is you can't really tell how thin it needs to be until you've printed one. And then if it's too thick, you know, you can blot it with the newsprint, and it takes a lot of the print off. And sometimes I've been known to run the print back through the press with newsprint, clean newsprint on top of it, so that it takes off more of the print, more of the ink on the surface of the print. So it's actually quite difficult with very thin layers to gauge, because, you know, it's just so fine, the line between too thin and too thick. You know, you're talking sort of, you can't tell when you're mixing it on the surface how thin it is until you've printed one. So I have a lot of tricks up my sleeve to get the right, roughly.
Yes, yeah. I think Teresa has a question. Teresa?
Yeah, I was just, I mean, it's along those lines, really. Do you add, it looked to me like you use very sticky ink. Not
actually, you know what, not really. I just think when I'm being filmed, I just sort of I just ink it up, and I'm not concentrating. So when on these films, the ink is often looking quite thick and tacky, but it's not really. And also the finish, I mean, this is just for a demonstration, but if it is a bit too thick, I'll just blot it. You don't see me blotting away madly because I've over inked it, but it's normally a lot finer than that.
Do you let the ink dry between layers? Or?
Yeah, I have to. Yeah, that all adds to the, the laboriousness of it, really, because it can take days sometimes. Especially the more layers of ink on the surface, because the first layer of ink, of course, it gets absorbed into the paper, so it dries quite quickly. By the time you get to the fourth layer, it's sitting on another 3 layers of ink, a lot of it, and it just takes ages to dry.
Yeah, that's right. Sorry, Teresa, did you want to add something?
Yes, I was going to ask about the paper you use, because it looked to me quite textured as opposed to the normal kind of, flat planographic looking thing. So you obviously, as you're blotting, you're showing that sort of textured Somerset or whatever you're using to come through. You like that effect?
I do, because it gives you texture, basically, so you can get quite a nice mottled effect. So the shadows, are quite often mottled, and I quite like the finished print where the first colour is dead flat and matte, and by the time you get to the last layer, it's quite mottled and quite shiny. I quite like that difference in the way the ink is sitting on the print.
How long do you think it would take you to if you're having to wait for them to dry as well in between? So it must take you quite a while to.
Yeah, weeks and weeks really. But I mean, there's always something else to be done. So there's always other printing to be done. And, you know, I mean, editioning is it could be a full-time job really, because so there's always, my drying rack is always full of prints in various stages of being finished with 4 blocks. It can be quite a long process, and it's got to be complete. Well, I don't normally let it dry completely if I'm proofing, because you can just whack it on and off, but certainly when I'm editioning, I do need the ink to be bone dry.
Very good. A question from Danielle. She says, do you divide the image up in your head when you're looking at it? Say from a train, she says. So do you work out your layers? Is that what you mean, Jane? Do you work out the layers as you're looking at the image to begin with? Have you already started thinking about how you're going to?
Yeah, no, I mean, when you look at an image, do you automatically find yourself dividing it up? You know, when you see a picture or something and you think, oh, I'm going to make a lino cut of that, do you then proceed to separate out its parts in your head?
No, I do the drawing first, and as I'm drawing, I then start to think, well, that could be black. If I start that in a dark colour, and then I put that, and I'll cut that bit away, and I start to sort of start the process, but not until I've done the drawing. Once the drawing is done and finished, then I'll start thinking about the printing after that.
Very good. Jackie's asking whether you use dryers or just let the ink dry naturally.
Well, I use dryers if I'm proofing.
Oh, okay.
Because, you know, obviously that helps. But I find that the cobalt dryers, I do use them, but I'm quite careful that I'll use them on the first layer because it's dark. But I find if you use it on a very pale and thin colour, I find after, not straight away, but after a few months, it affects the colour a bit. It makes it a little, I don't know, it does something to the colour, and so I don't really use it on the thin top layers at all, or the glazes, because I do find it, some of the inks, not all of them, but some of them are affected by I've got some very old prints in my drawers, or that have been framed for a long time, and they are not looking as crisp and as clean as the others. They've got a bit yellow.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, isn't it? They say they don't, but I think that's probably true, isn't it?
I think if you just use, you know, Laura Boswell, who is obviously a very good relief printmaker, she said that she uses 1 drop per spoonful of ink. So I think if you're just really careful with how much you use, you can probably get away with it.
Yeah, yeah. That sounds great. I was going to ask you where you think you may have got your eye for colour from, because you have a very unique way of using colour. You know, so if we were wandering around Borough Market or looking at Battersea Power Station, we wouldn't see the same colours as you. And I just wonder, well, I certainly wouldn't, I can't speak for everybody else, obviously, but I just wondered whether you know, whether you've always had that kind of ability to see things like that, or whether it comes from your, I don't know, education or whatever.
I don't know. I think my mother, being West Indian, she was always cold here, always cold. And I think our house, all the houses we lived in, as we travelled around quite a lot within South London, not terribly adventurous, but she used to have bright orange curtains and lots of big posters on the walls. And so she did have quite a colourful house when we were growing up, quite unusually. You know, because, you know, growing up in the London suburbs, it was a little bit tamer, but she always had quite an exotic looking house, really. I mean, we don't have any money, so it was always tea towels and posters.
You were sort of surrounded by little pieces of colour everywhere. And
because it's dark, she was quite olive skinned, she wore lots of bright colours as well. So it might come from that. I don't know, you know, these things, they just sort of happen, don't they?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's just such interesting colours. Yeah, beautiful.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a question? I'm just trying to see if anyone's got their hands up. Otherwise, I can ask them all questions. I was going to ask whether you prefer to work in a very large scale, because a lot of your prints are very big, and they must. I do lino cut printmaking myself, and sometimes I just think, why did I decide to make something so large? It's so complex, and I know you do smaller pieces as well, but a lot of your work's very large, isn't it?
Yes.
Do you just prefer working on that scale, or is it
fitting
to the subject matter of your work?
I think it's easier in a way to work on a large scale with Linocut because it's, I mean, it is quite a crude matrix. You know, you're just digging out chunks of lino and trying to make a picture. So, you know, by its very nature, it's not a delicate medium. So I forgot what the question was, Kate. What was it? I know.
Whether you like working on that large scale.
Oh, yes, large scale. Yes. Yeah. So you can get a lot more detail. The little ones I do struggle with them because I'm not a very good cutter. I'm not all that interested in mark making or anything like that. I'm just quite interested in the end result. And with the little ones, I mean, I'm just not very patient with the little fine lines. And then when you print little ones, you have to be really careful that you don't get the ink clogged up in the lines. And so I much prefer to work big. But on the other hand, when I'm editioning, of course, it's a real drag because they're so big. They take up so much ink and so much space. And there's quite a lot of more room for them to go wrong with the registration. The little ones are easier to register than the big ones. The big ones, you know, so yeah, I mean, I like making the bigger ones, but I prefer to edition the little ones.
Yes, that sounds familiar. But your registration on your video looks amazingly simple. You just put it in and you just whip it through the press and it's all perfect.
Yeah,
it's just like that, Gail.
Well, it sort of is in a way because I've done it for so long, and I mean that's how I was taught. You know, you make your registration board with your little piece of card there, and a little piece for your paper, and a little piece for your lino. And that's how you do it. And I just sort of do it like that. It's second nature, you know. It's like driving a car. When I was learning to drive a car, I thought I'm never going to be able to do this. It's just too complicated and too difficult. But actually, you learn, and it just becomes something you do all the time. So yeah, I mean, I sometimes misregister them, but not very often. Not very often.
And you don't have your editioning done by anyone else at all? No, that's fine.
I'd like to, but I don't. Well, one, I don't earn enough money, and two, I don't know where I'd get one from, quite honestly.
So do you tend to do more printmaking than painting these days? Or
I do. I don't know why. I suppose it comes in waves, doesn't it? I mean, I did a lot of painting when I was younger, and then I did a lot of printmaking, and then I went back to the painting. But for the last few years, really, I've just been on the printmaking. I like printmaking because, you know, when you do a painting, you sell it, you never see it again. I've no idea where any of my paintings are. I quite like having what I call my archive copy in my drawer. So I've always got a copy of everything that I've ever done, because otherwise it's actually quite hard. You've slaved over this thing and then it's gone to God knows where.
That's true.
Next one, and I'm a slow worker. And I think, you know, painting can be quite torturous. And I might, even if I was painting full time, I probably wouldn't do more than 10 paintings a year. Well, you know, I'm not going to get anywhere that way. So
yeah, that's true. Yeah. And I was intrigued by your Albion press that you found on eBay. So have you had that a long time? Or?
Yeah, I have. I was thinking about that today. It's been, I mean, it must be getting on for 20 years. I mean, I've been an avid supporter of eBay since 1999, I think, or, you know, right from the really as soon as it started. And I must have bought it. Yeah, it must be 20 years ago nearly. I bought it. It was a bloke in Norfolk. He had it in his barn, and it used to be, back in the 50s and 60s, it was used to print those playbills for the local theatre, because you could tell from the tin pan that you could see the impression of all these posters and bill posters, or whatever they're called. And he had it in his barn, and I paid him the 1,500 quid or whatever it was, and then he just put it on the trailer on the back of his car, and he sort of lashed it to the trailer and brought it all the way down to London. And then I got a couple of blokes, and we just got it off and into my garage, and that's how I started with the
amazing. Very lucky. Fantastic. Well, does anybody have more questions? Kit, have you got your hand up? Yeah. Yes, Kit's got a question now.
Gail, I just wondered if you have any printmaking heroes, or who you consider your major influences.
Yes, I would say Edward Boughton really would be the number one. I like the Japanese printmakers as well. I can't remember his name. Hatsui I don't know, but basically Edward Borden of the Printmakers, yes, definitely. I love all his prints, and he was so free with his cutting, and he used to do those great big ones and put and you know, just sort of walk all over them to print them. There's a very nice film on YouTube. I don't know if anybody's seen it. A black and white film done back in maybe in the 60s of him and his studio and interviews with him, and a little film of him printing one of those great big long ones, you know, probably not Liverpool Street Station, it might have been Brighton Pier, one of those enormous ones, just walking up and down. If anybody's not seen it, I think you just Google, put Edward Borden into the search bar on YouTube, and there it is. Great film.
Great tip. Yes, I haven't seen that one.
Really nice.
Have you got any plans to make anything as big?
Well, I keep thinking about that because I can't do anything much wider unless I want to do the whole walking around in the studio, which I don't really want to do. But I do feel like I could do these very big ones that I do. I could make them twice as long, I feel, and have something at the end of the press to catch it, so it doesn't, so the lino doesn't just fall off the edge, and print one half and then take it all out and turn it round and print the other half. I keep thinking about this. I don't know whether it would work, Kit, but you know, if it does, I'll let it go.
That sounds very challenging. That sounds amazing, though. Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any more questions? Otherwise, I think we'll give Gail a round of applause if Teresa will unmute us. Thank you, Gail.
Very welcome.
That was so good. Very informative, and given us all lots of inspiration, I'm sure. And we'll put details of your exhibition on our website and social media, so that if people would like to go along and see your Back to Black exhibition at the Eames Gallery, they'll be able to do that from September.
Well, that'd be lovely to see.
Great, really good. Thank you very much, and thanks very much to everybody for joining us this evening.